The crystal chandeliers of Lou Bernardine cast dancing shadows across the white tablecloths as Manhattan's elite enjoyed their Thursday evening ritual. Richard Montgomery adjusted his Armani cufflinks, checking his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Across from him, 10-year-old Kevin struggled with his silverware, metal braces catching the light as his hands trembled slightly. "Dad, can we go home?" Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. Richard's jaw tightened. 2 years since the accident that had changed everything. 2 years since Elizabeth's death in the same crash that had stolen his son's easy mobility. 2 years of the best specialists money could buy, and still Kevin retreated into himself every time they ventured into public. "We're having dinner, Kevin, like a normal family." The word normal hung between them like a challenge neither could meet. Ashley Johnson balanced her tray with practiced ease, navigating between tables filled with people who saw her as furniture. 5 years at Le Bernardine had taught her to become invisible, a skill that served her well when serving clients who treated staff like they were part of the decor. Her shift was nearly over, and her mind was already on tomorrow's responsibilities: the bookstore job, tutoring sessions, and the evening she'd spend reviewing grant applications for Freedom Steps. She'd noticed the Montgomery table the moment they'd arrived. Not because of Richard Montgomery's reputation, though everyone in the restaurant knew who he was, but because of the boy. Kevin reminded her of Marcus, her nephew, before the breakthrough that had changed everything. The same careful movements, the same way of making himself small in public spaces. The soft piano melody drifted through the restaurant as Ashley passed their table. She watched Kevin's face transform as the music reached him, a moment of pure joy breaking through his careful composure. His foot began to tap beneath the table, and for an instant, he looked like any other 10-year-old boy. Then Kevin stood up. The restaurant's ambient conversation dimmed as conversations paused. Kevin's braces caught the light as he took a shaky step toward Ashley, his hand extended with the courage that only children possess. Would you dance with me?" The question fell into the sudden silence like a stone into still water. Ashley felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward them. She saw the mixture of hope and terror in Kevin's eyes, the way his extended hand trembled, not from his condition, but from the vulnerability of the moment. "Kevin, sit down. Now." Richard's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Manager Thornton materialized beside their table, his face a mask of professional disapproval. "Sir, I must ask you to control your son. Our staff are not entertainers, and this is not appropriate behavior for an establishment of our caliber." Ashley saw Kevin's face crumble. The hope died in his eyes as shame took its place. She watched him start to lower his hand, watched him begin to retreat into the shell she recognized so well. "My shift just ended," Ashley said quietly, removing her apron. "I was on my way out anyway." Every muscle in Richard's body tensed. "What do you think you're doing?" Ashley looked directly at him, seeing past the expensive suit to the desperate father underneath. "I'm accepting an invitation to dance." She took Kevin's hand gently. "I can't dance very well in this apron anyway." The small space between the tables became a world unto itself. Kevin took a hesitant step forward, his foot dragging slightly across the polished floor. The sound of his brace scraped against the silence, but Ashley didn't flinch or try to guide him. She simply matched his pace, letting him lead. Richard watched, frozen between anger and something he couldn't name. A memory surfaced unbidden, Elizabeth dancing with Kevin in their living room, laughing as he stood on her feet. "It's not about the steps, Richard," she'd said. "It's about the connection." Around them, the restaurant held its breath. Ashley could feel the weight of judgment, the whispered comments about inappropriate behavior and professional boundaries. But Kevin's face had transformed again. The fear was gone, replaced by concentration and something that looked remarkably like pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being helped or guided or corrected. He was leading. "This is highly irregular," Thornton muttered to Richard. "I assure you, she'll be terminated immediately." But Richard wasn't listening. He was watching his son, really watching him, for the first time in months. Kevin's movements were careful but deliberate. His smile was genuine. In this moment, He wasn't a patient or a problem to be managed. He was a boy who had asked someone to dance. The music ended, and Ashley stepped back with a small curtsy. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Montgomery," she said formally, as if addressing a gentleman at a ball. "It was an honor." Kevin beamed. "Did you see, Dad? I led the whole time." As Ashley turned to leave, Richard found himself standing. "Wait." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, uncertain in a way that was foreign to him. The entire restaurant waited, understanding that whatever happened next would depend on the whim of one of the most powerful men in the city. "What's your full name?" "Ashley Johnson, sir." Richard reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card. "My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. He handed her the card, acutely aware of every eye in the restaurant watching the exchange. Ashley took it without visible emotion, though her fingers trembled slightly. "Why?" Kevin asked as Ashley walked away. "Why did you do that?" Richard looked at his son, at the boy Elizabeth had entrusted to his care, the child whose needs he'd systematically ignored in favor of expensive solutions that fixed nothing. Because sometimes, Kevin, we need to learn when to follow instead of lead. Montgomery Tower's lobby gleamed with the cold perfection of money and power. Ashley felt a weight of curious stares as she approached the reception desk in her best outfit, a navy blue suit purchased from a discount rack, but worn with quiet dignity. Ashley Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery. The receptionist's clinical assessment was as familiar as it was irrelevant. Ashley had learned long ago that other people's assumptions about her were their problem, not hers. The elevator ride to the 18th floor gave her time to center herself. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. This moment had been 2 years in making, ever since the Montgomery Foundation had rejected their first grant proposal without so much as a meeting. Miss Winters, Richard's assistant, was a woman who wielded administrative power like a weapon. Her assessment of Ashley was swift and dismissive. "Mr. Montgomery is finishing a conference call. Follow me." As they walked through the executive corridors, Ashley felt the curious stares of employees and used to seeing someone like her in these spaces. She'd grown accustomed to being an anomaly, a black woman in predominantly white spaces, a waitress in executive boardrooms, a dreamer in rooms full of spreadsheets. "He's had you fired, hasn't he?" Winters said suddenly when they were alone in the waiting room. "It's what usually happens. Important clients complain, and people in your position lose their jobs." "People in my position?" "Service workers who forget their place." Ashley smiled, not with amusement, but with recognition. "And where exactly is my place supposed to be?" Before Winters could answer, her phone buzzed. "He'll see you now." Richard Montgomery's office occupied half the floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan. The man himself stood silhouetted against the glass, looking out over the city like a general surveying his domain. "Mr. Montgomery." Ashley's greeting was professional but not deferential. He turned, his face carefully composed. "Miss Johnson, thank you for coming." The silence that followed was calculated, a power play designed to make visitors uncomfortable, to encourage them to fill the void with nervous chatter that might reveal weaknesses. Ashley recognized the tactic and waited. "Do you have a background in education?" Richard finally asked. "Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU. I was working on my master's in adaptive education before I had to leave school." Something flickered across Richard's face. Surprise, perhaps even embarrassment. "And you work as a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs. The restaurant, weekend shifts at a bookstore, and tutoring when I can find students. People do what they have to do to survive." Richard moved to his desk, picking up a manila folder. "I had you researched, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand who the person was who." He paused, as if the words were difficult. "Who danced with my son." He opened the folder, revealing printed photographs of a community center, children with various mobility aids engaged in movement activities. Freedom steps. Ashley sat straighter. "You did your homework." A dance program for children with physical disabilities, founded 6 years ago by you and your sister, currently facing closure due to lack of funding. Richard's voice was carefully neutral. You co-authored 3 grant proposals to the Montgomery Foundation, all rejected. Without a meeting, Ashley added. Without even a phone call. I want to hire you. Ashley had expected this, but hearing it still felt surreal. As what? As a therapeutic companion for Kevin. I'll pay you 5 times what you're making now. Ashley stood up. No. Richard looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd never heard the word directed at him. Excuse me. I don't work for people who see my color or my economic status before they see my qualifications. And I definitely don't work for people who think they can buy solutions to emotional problems. Richard's face flushed. You're turning down financial security out of pride. Out of dignity, Ashley corrected. And because your son deserves better than someone who's paid to pretend to care about him. She walked toward the door, then paused. Kevin doesn't need more experts, Mr. Montgomery. He needs space to discover his own strength. From her purse, she withdrew a business card. Simple, professional. Nothing like the expensive cardstock Richard was accustomed to. Freedom Steps. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 4 p.m. First class is free if you'd like to bring Kevin. As she left, Ashley passed Winters, who had obviously been eavesdropping. You just turned down Richard Montgomery. The woman whispered. Are you insane? Ashley smiled. Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than owned. If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video. The following Tuesday, Ashley was reviewing intake forms when her sister Zoe burst through the community center doors. There's a Bentley outside, she whispered urgently, and you won't believe who's sitting in it. Through the window, Ashley saw the luxury vehicle parked incongruously among the beat-up cars and city buses. Kevin sat in the back seat, his face pressed against the glass as he watched children with various mobility aids entering the building. Richard remained in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if fighting an internal battle. He's not coming in, Zoe predicted. Men like him don't come to places like this. Ashley watched the car, remembering Kevin's expression during their brief dance. Don't underestimate the power of a determined child. They watched as the car door opened. Kevin emerged slowly, adjusting his braces, then looked back at his father. After a moment that seemed to stretch forever, Richard got out too. He looked profoundly uncomfortable in his attempt at casual clothing, khakis and a polo shirt that still screamed wealth and privilege. I knew he'd come, Ashley murmured. What did you do? Zoe asked. Ashley didn't answer, but her eyes held secrets her sister didn't fully understand. Hidden in her apartment was a notebook filled with research about children like Kevin and men like Richard Montgomery. Years of observation, study, and careful planning had led to this moment. The community center buzzed with activity. Children with cerebral palsy, amputees, kids with spina bifida, all moving to music in ways that traditional therapy never encouraged. It was controlled chaos, purposeful and joyful. Mr. Montgomery. Ashley greeted them at the door. Welcome to Freedom Steps. Kevin stared in wonder at the children around him. A girl in a wheelchair spun in precise circles, while a boy with a prosthetic leg created his own rhythm. It's so free, he whispered. There's no structure here, Richard observed, his discomfort obvious. There's structure, Ashley replied. It's just not the kind you're used to recognizing. She knelt to Kevin's level. Would you like to join them? Kevin nodded enthusiastically, but looked to his father for permission. Richard's throat worked as he fought some internal battle. Go ahead, he said finally. I'll be right here. As Ashley guided Kevin to the group, an older woman approached Richard. Dr. Elaine Mercer was in her 70s, with silver hair braided elegantly and eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Mr. Montgomery, she said, extending her hand. Dr. Elaine Mercer, you've rejected my research proposals 3 times. Richard's face went carefully blank. Dr. Mercer, I didn't expect to see you here. I oversee the research component of Freedom Steps. We're studying how self-directed movement affects neuroplasticity in children with mobility challenges. Research. Richard's voice was flat. I thought this was just a community dance program. It's both, Ashley said, returning from settling Kevin with the group. Freedom Steps is a pilot program integrating adaptive movement with neuroscientific principles. We're documenting unprecedented progress in motor skill development. Why didn't you mention this in your grad applications? We did, in detail, on pages you apparently never read. The front door opened, and several people with cameras and notepads entered. Richard immediately tensed. What's this? The other part of our plan, Ashley said calmly. Dr. Mercer handed Richard a freshly printed journal article. Our preliminary results were published this morning. Revolutionary approaches to pediatric motor rehabilitation, a community-based model. You used my son for a publicity stunt, Richard said, his voice dangerous. We used an opportunity to demonstrate what we've been trying to tell you for 2 years, Ashley replied. Sometimes showing is more effective than telling. She led him to a wall covered with photographs and progress charts. Dozens of children, all with mobility challenges, all showing documented improvement. At the end of the wall was an empty frame. What's that? Richard asked. Our vision. A full rehabilitation center serving 500 children a year instead of 50. We could build it if we had adequate funding. You orchestrated all of this. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on Media Day. I saw an opportunity and I took it. For months ago, when your foundation canceled our appointment without explanation, I promised myself I'd find another way to reach you. A commotion from the main floor drew their attention. Kevin was in the center of the room, surrounded by other children and adults. Someone had turned down the music, and everyone was watching in fascination. Kevin had removed one of his braces entirely and was trying to balance with just his lighter support. His face was a mask of concentration as he focused on something no one else could see. Kevin. Richard started forward, but Ashley caught his arm. Wait, she said quietly. Watch. Kevin took a deep breath, steadied himself, then took a complete step forward without his heavy brace. It was small, shaky, but entirely his own achievement. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Richard felt his carefully constructed composure crumble. Tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 2 years gathered in his eyes as he watched his son's face light up with pride and accomplishment. That's why we do this, Ashley said softly. Not for perfect steps, but for first steps toward independence. The reporters had noticed Richard's presence. A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd as cameras turned toward him. Kevin, oblivious to the attention, continued practicing his new skill with single-minded determination. Richard Montgomery found himself at a crossroads. He could retreat in anger, confirming his reputation as a cold businessman who cared more about control than his son's well-being. Or he could embrace this moment Kevin had created, this breakthrough that no amount of money had been able to purchase. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter approached with a microphone. Could you comment on your presence here today? Is it true that the Montgomery Foundation has repeatedly rejected funding for this program? Richard looked at his son, still glowing with accomplishment, then at Ashley, who had orchestrated this moment with the precision of a master strategist. Finally, at the cameras that would broadcast his response to the world. You know what's difficult for someone in my position, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room, admitting when we're wrong. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. The Montgomery Foundation is proud to announce full funding for Freedom Steps for the next 5 years, including construction of a permanent rehabilitation center based on the innovative methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Miss Johnson. Camera flashes exploded around them. Zoe gasped audibly. The children cheered, not fully understanding the significance, but catching the joy of the adults around them. With one condition, Richard continued, his eyes finding Ashley's. Miss Johnson retains complete autonomy over the program methodology. No corporate interference. 6 months later, Construction crews were breaking ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The building would be unlike anything the Montgomery Foundation had ever funded, every space designed with input from the children and families who would use it. Ashley visited the construction site regularly, usually accompanied by Kevin and often by other children from the program. To the construction workers' amazement, Richard Montgomery also appeared frequently, trading his designer suits for hard hats and work boots as he consulted with architects and engineers. "I never thought I'd see you reading neuroplasticity research," Ashley commented one afternoon as they reviewed building plans. Richard looked up from a scientific journal, bristling with sticky notes. "I never thought I'd need to understand the connection between movement and brain development. But here we are. Is this penance or genuine interest?" Kevin asked me to help him remove his second brace last week. When I said we should wait for his physical therapist's approval, he told me his physical therapist said it would be impossible for another 2 years. Ashley smiled. "But you fired her because you told me she was wrong about his potential. And she was." They watched through the construction trailer window as Kevin balanced on one crutch, helping a younger child find her rhythm. His movements were still careful, still limited, but they flowed with a confidence that no medical professional had predicted. "Why won't you let me apologize?" Richard asked suddenly. "Because you haven't apologized yet. You've reallocated resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology, that's restitution." Richard nodded slowly. "Point taken." At the center's opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night at Le Bernardin couldn't have been more stark. The spacious, adaptive facility buzzed with children of all abilities, moving freely to music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. In the main hall, Kevin, now using only a lightweight cane on difficult days, led a choreographed routine with 5 other children. His movements were still limited by his condition, but they flowed with a grace and confidence that spoke to something deeper than physical therapy. Richard watched from the audience, not directing or managing, simply present. "He doesn't need you to rescue him anymore," Ashley said, appearing beside him. "No," Richard agreed, "but he still needs me to be here." "There's a difference." A reporter approached them. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Richard looked at Kevin, who was now helping a younger girl with cerebral palsy find her balance. "I'm proud of him, not for what he's overcome, but for what he's created for others." "What's been the biggest lesson you've learned through this experience?" Richard Montgomery, the man who had built an empire on the principle that he always knew best, looked directly into the camera. "That real leadership isn't about guiding people down the path you think is right. It's about having the courage to follow when someone shows you a better way." A year later, Freedom Steps had expanded to 6 cities across the country. Ashley received the National Innovation Award for Pediatric Rehabilitation, and her methodology was being implemented in hospitals and therapy centers nationwide. Kevin, now 12 and using mobility aids only when he chose to, had become a youth spokesperson for the program. His presentations to medical conferences and parent groups carried the authority of lived experience, combined with natural eloquence. Richard had learned the most difficult lesson of all, that true power lay not in controlling every variable, but in recognizing when it was time to step back and let others lead. In a world where those with power rarely examine their assumptions, and those without power often remain invisible, their story had become something larger than any of them had imagined. It demonstrated that real transformation occurred not through grand gestures or massive donations, but through the courage to cross the invisible boundaries that separated people from each other. When a billionaire learned from a waitress, when a father followed his son's lead, when a community center became a model for national change, these were the moments that proved the most profound revolutions began not with manifestos or movements, but with one person having the courage to extend their hand and another having the wisdom to take it. The dance that had begun in a Manhattan restaurant had become a movement that spanned the country, and at its center remained simple truth, that dignity, respect, and human connection could not be purchased, only offered freely and accepted with grace. In the end, Ashley Johnson had been right about one thing from the very beginning. Some lessons couldn't be bought or taught. They had to be lived, one step at a time.